Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has worked me so hard this past year that I can't find an intro to the cast this week.
Tim Longo. Oh, man. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Year-end podcast, I had to find something that's not specific, to any particular game that we played. So that's what you get. It is not he that works me so hard. It's me. That is just what I'm like. And it's a common game developer problem. It actually came up in a couple of our interviews, listening back to them over the weekend. People talking about working to, especially Brian Algar, about working so hard on games and just putting in the hours and being exhausted. It was very funny. Funny. I mean, he made it light the way he talked about it.
But when you're living through it, it's not the same.
Yeah, exactly. Thing. Yeah, well, looking back on it, 20 years later or whatever, it was a little easier for him to laugh. But at the time, they had said if they had put together an email like that they were going to mail to themselves in 5 years, they were going to schedule it to be mailed to them 5 years later, and we're asking for things to say, and what he had to say was, if I'm still working on Ratchet and Clank in 5 years, please kill me. And of course,
that's right. I remember him saying that.
Yeah, and it's been 20 years, and they just came out with another one. So anyway. We are, of course, reviewing our past year, and these things are very fresh in my mind because of listening to them over again at a higher speed, but over the past couple of days. So what we like to do is kind of take our takeaways, generally from the from the interviews rather, and not necessarily just from the games we played, although good themes can come from anywhere. I tend to take them from the interviews and clip in little bits of it. So we'll see how that goes this year. I guess do you have any other thoughts, like how you pull yours together? You do yours from memory? Is that true?
I do a combo. I did listen to most of Remy's and most of Brian's just to refresh my memory. I didn't get a chance to listen to James beforehand. And I was mainly looking for, or Sebastian's, yeah. And I was mainly re-listening to. I do generally go from memory because I feel like if it sticks in my brain, then it's probably something worth mentioning. You know what I mean? Like the ones that stand out. Like we need more keys that aren't keys, which is still like one of the best ones we've ever had. Yeah. But what I do is I try to go back and I listen to most of the episodes so I can make sure that I'm kind of remembering the thing that I think I am and give it a little bit more context because it's been so long. But James is the one I'll give for James is kind of more of a wacky one than it's specific. And I do a combo because I think I like basically most of mine are focused on the interviews, but I have a couple that are sort of like takeaways for the year. That are more general that I just wanted to quickly mention. We don't have to talk about them at length, and obviously there wouldn't be clips for them, but I don't know. It's the whole year on, upon reflection. It's like, what did I learn, from what we played this year as a group, and see if anything. Sometimes nothing comes when I ask myself that, but a couple small things came up, but most of mine are,
Cool. All right. Well, let's dig right in then. We want to throw me your first one?
Yeah. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't order them, and I guess it doesn't matter. The first one I have is from Baldur's Gate and from James's sort of interview. So
sure.
So I guess we'll start there. I don't know if we should have put them in order of.
No, that's fine.
Well, so this one's a little bit unorthodox because it's not necessarily a quote per se, but it's more of the sort of talking to him about the genesis of the characters. And for me, it was a little bit personal because the colleague of mine, Michael Backus, who I contacted to get us in contact with James to actually even get that set up. When I asked him, I think I'd maybe told this on air, but to reiterate it, or maybe I told you off air, when I asked Michael, he texted me back a picture of the character sheet of who's the villain?
Saravok, yeah.
Saravok.
You did ask on the, and you mentioned Michael.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. And then I think we asked James, it's like, so tell us about that, and I just love that Baldur's Gate, which Brett and I have a mutual friend that we play D&D with, who's like his favorite game of all time, and he's younger than us. So it was like at a time in his life when he didn't know about D&D before Baldur's Gate, and talking about Joel, and and I just love that the tangibility of the character sheets for these characters that became immortalized, in this digital format, and the story behind the fact that they, some of the characters were actually played by, they played in D&D campaigns together and played by friends of his who were either on the team, I forget, on the team or friends, local friends up in Canada and such. And so that's just a very memorable, I think it's one of the most memorable stories from our interviews for this year for sure, but of any interview, just like, because it's not your typical approach, or it's not expected, and to the degree where Baldur's Gate is a D&D game that was heavily based on a real system, intentionally, and so that kind of made sense to do it that way. So it's sort of like a perfect storm of a situation where, in this case, an actual Dungeons and Dragons character sheet or multiple character sheets were used in the creation of a video game. So I just love that story.
Yeah, so it was actually Ray's idea. Ray was like, because I was writing the story, doing dialogue, and I was having to create so many characters. I was like, holy crap, I have to create so many characters. Like, why don't you just use all the character sheets from your binders from your campaign? Like, because I have everyone's character who'd ever played in one of my campaigns. I kept care of all of them, so because I knew that a lot of players wouldn't care about them, but they might in the future. And hey, they did. Anyway, so all the characters in Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2, with the exception of a few in Baldur's Gate, there's a couple in Baldur's Gate 2 that aren't from my campaigns, but most of them are, and they're just different people's player characters from my Forgotten Realms campaign that I was like running for years and years and years and years. So that was, and what I would do is they would, like, for example, Minsk and Boo was created by Cam Topher, and the whole interaction between Minsk and Boo was his creation. But the voice for Minsk and Boo, like the funny dialogue lines and all that was Luke Christiansen, who was essentially the first writer that I hired out of all the, and he was a better writer than me. So I was just like, all right, I got to get this Luke to start writing all the most important dialogue as soon as possible. Since, I was very good at letting other people, as soon as I got someone who could do something better than me, getting them to do it instead. But yeah, so while they came from the campaign, they would, obviously the writer who was implementing them or writing them would give them a voice that would make them more interesting than just someone else's character. Though I think it's kind of a melding of both. But yeah, I don't know. Saravok was this guy named Jeff Feitenhammer's character. Actually, Jeff died of cancer a few years ago. And one of the last things I did was I went up to visit him in Canada, and I brought him this. So it might be from, like, I brought him his character sheet because he wanted to see it, because it was like he was always proud of the fact that his character was a major villain in a big video game.
Wow.
But yeah.
Yeah, and also very touching was hearing from James about how the player who had played Saravok had passed away a few years prior to this interview. And he had asked James to bring the character sheet so he could see it, and so James was kind of a repository for that. It's funny because, as much as we have memories of video games we play, you and I, as longtime D&D players, can remember just crazy amounts of D&D stuff that have happened to us in our, playing, and how memorable that is because you invest so much time in it, like video games, but not in sort of that compressed solo way, but with a group of people. And that's hugely important. I mean, it's sort of like an MMO, for you in particular. Like this past weekend we were playing, and Asmodeus came up, and I was like, oh my God, I remember when I was like 10 or 11, I did a solo, like just, build a character, and now I'm going to fight Asmodeus. Like build a character to do a one-on-one fight against Asmodeus or something like that type thing on a Saturday afternoon D&D, game. I didn't get a chance to say that Saturday, but it's something I immediately remembered. And I knew and I could picture his picture in the book. Like I knew exactly, like as soon as from the first edition, or AD&D, I just was like immediately, I was like, oh my God, so now I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how much more that's going to intersect, but oh man. So it's just, those things really make a long-term impression. Since you mentioned the Baldur's Gate interview, I guess I'll start with mine, which is part that, and I have some that echo, that we hear a couple times, and I like to call that out. And in this case, there's one they're sort of similar. One from James Olin about Baldur's Gate, about loving this thing and getting a chance to make it into a digital form, and how when you love something so much, that's something that's impossible to fake. And so because you love it so much, you will be a good steward of it, basically, was kind of what he said. And it was just, and also that you make it your own because you're adapting it and you love it that much. So that was one idea. I'll put the clip in here.
Well, I think it's, one of the things that is impossible to fake is loving something. So it's like, which is why, whenever, how everything comes from something, everything is inspired by something. It's always okay to be inspired by something that you love, because if you love something, you understand it intimately, and therefore it comes through in your implementation of your version of it. And so it doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel derivative.
And then the other half of that sort of echoed in Brian Allgaier's interview was, they talked a lot about how much fun they had making the games. And what he said was, if you're having fun making the game, it will translate into the game. If you're having a really good time making the thing, that the thing will be fun because you're just having so much fun doing it, which is something I feel a lot lately. So that's, that's something that really resonated with me this year. I mean, they were talking about like finding the fun and having this sort of writer's room and doing all these crazy ideas. But yeah, I'll throw that clip in here as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, my philosophy is that if we're having fun making the game and coming up with just fun ideas and we're laughing in the room, that's going to translate to the player.
And so those were, they kind of rhyme, they're talking about something, because this is something we do, a lot of us, because we love games to begin with, and it's our, it's humbling to be able to translate that into a gift that we give to somebody else. So, that just connects me to what we do a lot, thinking about it in those terms.
Yeah, those are both good. My second one was actually from Brian, the having fun making the game that then translates into the game itself. So I figured you had that one as well. So
yeah,
we just heard the clip on it, but yeah, it's also have been feeling it lately. So it's weirdly appropriate, for personal to the both of us, and the audience can't really benefit from that. But I guess to bring it back to the audience, it's really more about like, I think that when you play games, whether you're a developer or aspiring developer or a player or just listener or what have you, I think that for the games that developers make where they have hit that sweet spot of it's fun making the game and playing the game and it translates to you as an audience, I think you can tell. And I'm hoping, obviously Brett and I both hope that will be the case for our next thing, but it's for players, the joy. Like I just finished Control on the podcast or on the stream, as everyone probably knows, and and I feel like that was a labor of love kind of project, right? There was a lot of passion put into that. Yeah. I don't know if they had fun making it per se, but there was it just felt like the team really knew what they wanted to make with it.
You can see them going the wacky extra mile, like, and that's a sign. Like, I want to contrast that. Like, I've definitely played games where I'm like, oh, they had no fun making this.
Yeah.
Like, it just feels dire. It just feels like, oh, this was a grind to get done. Like, and those are games.
Cynical.
I think a lot of middle of the road, 50, 60, 70, review games or whatever are those. They're just like, nobody ever got the spark out of them. And they had to finish the thing. They had a contract, etc. But nobody really had a lot of joy doing it, and there probably was a crunch and miserable. And there wasn't the redeeming fact of them actually enjoying what they were doing, right? It was just a slog. And that's why I think a lot of the times when I think on my own career, even though I have crunched, I don't really, like, I never felt like that was horrible,
Yeah.
Well, even though if you looked at the hours you put in on something, you'd be like, oh my God, that's madness. I shouldn't do that. Like, and I had a health scare, but I don't look back on that and go, man, I never should have done that. I look back on that and say, that was tough, but boy, I really felt like I gave my all to that and I thought it paid off, or whatever. So,
yeah.
And a lot of that is with the team for me. So,
yeah. And coming back to the intro, part of why you're probably self-prescribed working too much, right?
Yeah.
Not to get too personal, folks, but yeah. Yeah, that was a good partnership with those two clips. So yeah, agreed. My next one's coming from Brian as well, and we talk about Girl with a Stick from the beginning.
Yeah.
And Brett did his homework on that, which thank you for that. And that was a good story that Brian was able to share. And he talks about it for quite a length, but toward the sort of end, and I re-listened to this, toward the end of him talking about Girl on a Stick, he kind of concludes with sort of we come back to it at one point, and he kind of concludes with the summary of sort of like, we just weren't feeling it. There wasn't that spark. I think, Brett, you might have even used the word spark in the conversation, ironically, now that you just said that. I could be wrong on that. But and then, he says that, oh shoot, I just lost his name, the Insomniac.
Ted Price.
Ted Price. He said Ted, he said Ted at the time, who was more sort of hands on the projects early on in those days. He said Ted, ultimately made the call that, it wasn't going to work, and they canceled the project. And Brian gave examples of like, they were, the game wasn't cohesive, and the character was doing this and then this other thing. And then it was just, there wasn't like a thrust to it. And the reason I bring this quote up is obviously it's not necessarily a gem of a quote, of like, having fun making games makes, will translate to the game being fun. It was a good example, which I feel like we don't get too often on the podcast, where we get to actually deconstruct a canceled project, and how it got there. And I really appreciated him sharing that story, because it's, just a reminder that, a lot of fans and players out there never see that stuff. Right. And on purpose, and to remember how many canceled projects there are for whatever reason. And there are various reasons, but in that particular case, the reason I bring it up is that was the team and ultimately leadership. But Brian said, kind of the team kind of saw the writing on the wall too, that people, they came to the conclusion that it wasn't working. And, though it's hard to talk about canceled projects, people put work and time and effort and energy into that. Ratchet and Clank came out of that in a way, right? It's like there's something was spawned from this event, and so I just thought it was a cool story to hear him talk about it, and I'm glad you brought the game up. So the clip, Brett can put in the clip sort of toward the end of the story here, maybe.
We were trying to give it our all, but we just weren't fully, I think, emotionally invested in it. Our hearts weren't in it. And we had the Sony, the producers come by and check it out. It just wasn't really kind of gaining the momentum we'd hoped. So to Ted Price's credit, he saw kind of the writing on the wall and realized we really need to pivot right now, and just decided to pull the plug on the project and let's get back to making platform games. And so then that's how Ratchet and Clank were born. And back then, I think the working title was called I-5. So at Insomniac, we have I guess I-1 was technically Disruptor, the first game. Then we had the three Spyros. And so for the longest time, we either called it Girl with a Stick or I-5. And I think it's telling when the working title never changes and doesn't really have much of an identity, that it's, after a year's worth of work, it was time to pull the plug.
Yeah, it makes me think of projects that I've seen in concept phase, mostly at LucasArts, because that's not really how subsequent employers of mine have dealt with things. But I can remember Tim Schafer working on something after Grim Fandango. He had taken like a little sabbatical and then come back and worked on something for a few months, 6 months, something like that, before he left to found Double Fine. And that project, you can see aspects of it in his later projects. There's a little bit of it in Psychonauts, and then there's a lot of it in the one where the head gets the Headlander. There's a lot of the sort of setting is in Headlander, which I know he didn't sort of direct. I think that was Lee. Is it Perry? It's Lee Perry, right? At Double Fine.
I always get Perry and Petty.
Petty. I think Petty's the Epic guy.
The
so
Epic,
Perry, yeah. So Lee Perry was the art director. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it I think about that, and then there was another one that didn't even get that far. I had a few concepts that John Knowles was working on after Bounty Hunter that never saw the light of day either. And I always wonder, like, where did that go? Did that never be a thing? Actually, there's something about it in the Blackout Club, which was a thing that was out last couple of years from Question Games, I think. Anyway, it's something about Anyway, I these ideas, they never kind of entirely go away, but I'm sure somebody out there is making Girl with a Stick and finding the way to find fun with it. So,
wouldn't that be hilarious if Insomniac
came out with a Girl with a Stick? I mean, I actually, there was a canceled game that Bethesda had a demo of, and I won't say, but it is a former interviewee of this cast who had directed it, and it was bad, and it didn't come out, and they went on to do something else that was much better. I'll tell you off air. But it was, it was, I can't, because it's definitely not the sort of thing I should reveal. But yeah, you're like, okay, it's good that was canceled. Even though as a player at the time, I was disappointed. So we should be happy we didn't get Girl with a Stick, because we got Ratchet and Clank instead.
Yeah.
I have one from Remy. I had quite a few from Remy that,
I have three.
I have a lot that I could. I figured you would also have a bunch. And I can pull in certainly a number of other things in here. But the one that I really liked that applied really generally was him talking about this fragile relationship that the player has to the character that they're controlling, and how the camera has to keep that relationship, that breaking the camera in some way will break that fragile relationship, and that it's so hard to maintain. And he talked about, we talked about sort of like places where the camera would have to jump or move, or like, and all the work basically that went into that game with the volumes and the million things, but all of it was done to maintain this fragile relationship. And I just thought it's fairly late in the interview, as I recall. And actually, I don't think I have a timestamp, so we have to re-listen and find it. But it's a great insight to, like, this is such what we do is so weird. It's like you're controlling this person on a screen that you're, maybe it's up in your face if you're on a PC, but, that you're maybe 10 feet from, with this device in your hands, nowadays wireless, and you've got to maintain this thread, of connection and throughput and intention and all of that is kind of magical, and the camera contributes so much to that, and especially in Prince of Persia. So I will insert that clip here, although I know I'm going to have to track it down.
And camera perception and spatial perception and control of your character in third person is a very fragile thing. So even in later games that I worked on, like on the Tomb Raider series, we did, not on the latest ones, but in the reboot and Rise as well, I think, we used the camera splines in some of the runouts, some in the chase sequence or the escape sequences. And even that, because the camera is positioned at a specific angle, it's very tricky to make sure you can read the ledges where you have to jump, and even this can throw off your steering a little bit.
So yeah, I love that. I thought that was extremely insightful and almost kind of philosophical about what we do, and that's why it really stuck out to me. That was one that I remembered him talking about, and I think I was out of the house. I think I was walking around or maybe doing errands, so I didn't have a piece of paper to write down the time. I was like, oh, that's it. So I'll track that down tomorrow. But yeah, it was a great quote. Why don't we have some of your Remy thoughts?
Yeah, I think two of them maybe I'll just mention. We can kind of decide on the fly if we need if we need the clip for them. But the one I will actually say first, which I think the clip would be beneficial to partner with what the one you just said, which you mentioned already, is sort of maybe led up to the culmination of this by the end of the episode. But re-listening to him talking about the thousands of camera volumes and then also explaining the process for the sort of handing off from one volume to another, and just like the whole obviously the full clip would be too long, but just talking, giving the audience a perspective, especially in those days, though, to be honest, in some ways it hasn't gotten any easier. In some ways it's gotten even harder these days, but just the effort, I think, and hearing him kind of go through that. And I think we both kind of responded when he finished talking about it, as far as like, just, oof, yeah, how much goes into this stuff, and it's not meant to, I'm not pulling this one out to sort of like, woe is us or anything, or what have you. And I'm not looking for sympathy for game developers, but I think it just was a good reminder of, again, super passionate about what he was doing, perfectly happy to be doing it, excited about what the project was doing, knew that he was doing something amazing with the camera work and the level design in that game. And so, I'm sure he was happy to do it, but it's just the reminder of how much work and attention to detail goes into that relationship that you were just talking about. So it's sort of, again, a partner to what you were saying.
The way it worked it was super handcrafted. So we had not dozens, not hundreds, I would say thousands of volumes for the entire game. And it was a trigger volume based, not even trigger planes, just volumes, so that every time the character would enter a volume, we would trigger a certain set of attributes. So we had to create lists. In every single volume, we had an exclusion list.
Oh my God.
So that the way it worked is we would put the name of all the volumes. So if you came from volume 1 and you'd cross volume 2, you would put the name of volume 1 and volume 2 so that it would ignore, if you came from that volume, don't trigger this one. And this, we would do that for every single volume. And sometimes the list would go, like there would be like 5 of them.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
Wow. Yeah, it's a good clip. And it is, I was talking about Crunch and our gift, just a little bit ago. And it's how much we love what we're doing. And, how much we want to deliver the best thing we can, like how we're driven to do that. That, I mean, even I can remember in the conversation, just as we were talking about it, me going, oh yeah, because of course you were late in development when you realized you had this problem and you didn't have a easy solution. The solution was a ton of going through and tagging every volume with the list of things to ignore if you came from it. Like, I just was,
yeah, it's crazy.
I remember thinking, oh man, that's a lot of hours. And there's not, there's also not a good way. As he points out, I think in that conversation like a lot of that is still the way it's done to some degree, not quite as nutty because, some later work, I think there's not as much overlap or a chance to overlap. Because if the character dies, they just kind of dropping into the abyss or something like that. But it's still often the way. Sometimes that's just the only way to solve the problem, and you're still doing that. So, that's
and it's and the other thing that I think compounded it, which I think we talked about a little bit with him, is just because that was the first one of those for them. Like they didn't know, and you discover some of those things that maybe could be improved upon by tools, but you didn't know, like you said, until you're trying to ship that you needed that. And so maybe the second, third one, maybe even Assassin's Creed, right, ultimately benefits from some of these conclusions, and some of it you still do the same old fashioned ways, but when you're doing something like that for the first time, really, and that's like UB Montreal, the early days of that studio kind of really getting going, right? And now we obviously all know where they've gone since then. But that's just compounded by the fact that they're doing something fresh.
Do you want to give me the other one from Remy?
Yeah, I loved. I don't know if you necessarily need to put the clip in, but I loved his Donald Duck story.
Going Quackers.
Going Quackers. And just the fact that it was the jumping off point for him in his career, and
no pun intended.
Then, yeah, okay, fair enough. And he said even then he was studying camera, and he was trying to think about how camera was, because he was talking about he did a 2D level, but there was also like a run at the camera kind of Crash Bandicoot kind of level 2. And so it just kind of was neat to hear that. And he also mentioned some of the sort of, we know that Ubisoft has always been fairly inspired by Nintendo, right? And some of the connections that they still even have today. And so that was a fun story, more of a small, just kind of anecdote.
I did work on Donald Duck Quack Attack as a level designer. That was my first game ever.
But the other one that I forgot about until I was re-listening and caught again is I think the quote around it isn't that long, so I don't know if it necessarily needs to be put in, but he says camera design is like puzzle design or something like that. And I didn't remember that until I re-listened to it, and that one stuck with me this time on re-listening, because he kind of just throws it out there. It's a very quick kind of like comment, and he's so right. And when you for me at least as a designer and a level designer, and it kind of like it's sunk in then of like, yeah, that is really the best way to think about it, especially in a game where it's a 3D, sort of 3D environmental puzzle kind of game, like Prince specifically. But there is a sort of like, and I think he even talks about it in a way of, as a designer, a camera designer, it's almost like a puzzle, right? Like as he's making the game, he's sort of describing it like he's solving a puzzle himself, So it was just a very meta comment that he kind of just throws out there really quickly and then moves on. But it stuck with me.
It was challenging and fun to figure out how to use traversal mechanics to avoid traps and travel through this immense palace. So for me, it was actually a puzzle in itself to figuring out how to present it to the player. the game would be very difficult to play without the camera actually pointing in the right direction, or even be unplayable in some cases.
It makes me think of film editing in a way, right? Except that, in film editing, the constraints are things like time, and the variables are time. Like, how long am I going to hold this shot? And it can dramatically change the feeling of a space. For him, it's more about when am I going to pick up, when am I going to cut, to another camera to show what's going on. I mean, he doesn't talk about it in these terms, but he does have that sort of background. Right. I think that probably influenced him. But yeah, I did love that too. And we actually, how we followed up that conversation, I believe, was talking about how, some puzzles you then decide you're not going to try to solve. And so you try to prevent getting into the position where you have to solve that problem. Right. I think that connects together there. That's kind of the end of that thread, which I also thought was really, really interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to get Remy's in because although I have a couple other things that good camera work is invisible where we kind of start the conversation. I wanted to go back and shift gears a little bit to the interview with Sebastian Deacon. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things that was a key insight for me in that one, which is not about game design or music broadly, but is specific to Final Fantasy, was, and because I'm a fan and have played quite a number of them, the thing that I loved was having him describe that it totally makes sense that Uematsu loves prog rock.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
And because Final Fantasy stories kind of go all over the place. They're so weird. They're often steampunky or have steampunk elements, but they also just do lots of different sorts of things, which is exactly what prog rock does. It draws in strings, if it needs them. It'll have some weird, and then they're long pieces often, and they're just, and they can kind of go. They have lots of time signature changes sometimes. They just kind of go all over the place, and being able to pull all those influences into Final Fantasy VI makes sense when your composer is Nobuo Uematsu.
Yeah, so I think if you if you do the first thing that comes up if you Google Uematsu musical influences, I think you see prog rock is the number one thing that you'll find in the interviews that he has. And it's funny because Final Fantasy is kind of steampunky in a lot of its role, especially in Final Fantasy VI, and prog rock is the steampunk of music.
So that's the clip I like there. I mean, there were other things I loved from that interview, but that was one that just there's also the discussion of Realms music. That I love too. But that one for me, just as a fan, was just oh, exactly. You're right. And this is why I'm trying to talk more about music on the cast and why I specifically called it out on Halo a couple of weeks ago. Because it's a part of the games we often get chastised in email for not talking more about. And I'm genuinely making an effort to especially include it in series where I'm yeah, the music's amazing. Why? Why is it so good? Yeah. And what do I like about it? So anyway.
I still think to that point, I still think it might be fun to at least experiment at some point and have a third guest host come on for a whole series of something that is a specialist in something that we are not, a musician or something, and just play week by week with us and then come on the pod. I don't, it's a far-flung dream, but it would be interesting to do that at some point and see what happens. Because they would obviously bring up different things.
Yeah, for sure. You got another one for me?
No, Donald Duck was the last one. I think that hits all of mine, and you had the Brian one that I wanted to mention already.
Okay, yeah, I already touched on it. Yeah.
So
I actually
Drill and Stick. So
yeah, I have a couple. One I just want to touch on briefly because it's much on my mind right now for reasons, and that is that Brian Allgaier, kind of towards the end of his interview, talks about accessibility because that's where he's kind of moved into.
Yeah,
and it's something that's been coming up a lot, in the industry over the last, half decade or so, or maybe a bit longer. But it's something that's been increasingly important, and it also ties in a little bit with representation, but primarily it's about just letting more people play. I actually was looking up today. Are there left-handed controllers? I'm not left-handed.
Yeah.
10% of the population is, and I was like, neither Sony nor Microsoft have ever put out a official left-handed controller. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, oh man, I imagine left-handers kind of just grow up with the controller.
They just learn. Yeah.
And they just learn, but I was like, oh man, I can't even imagine. And there are third-party customizable controllers. They tend to be quite expensive because the pieces have to come out, right, in order to do that. So they're kind of an engineering challenge. I have one of those, as it turns out. It's kind of a pro, third-party controller that has detachable pieces, so you can move like the sticks around if you want an Xbox versus PlayStation style, or even move the buttons from side to side. So if you want the D-pad swapped with the face buttons, you can do that in this thing. But it was inexpensive. We had one sent to us by the manufacturer at Bethesda, and somebody handed it to me, saying, "Hey, you want this?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" It's really heavy. I like it. So that was one that I thought was important. Mm-hmm. But the other echo I had, so I'll end with an echo, is that it's really about how teams make the game, which I know is a thing that you like to say. The team makes the game. It kind of came up in two different ways. One was from James Olin, who talked about, how good ideas come from everywhere. And in particular, he said, and I like this, was that you should share the credit when those good ideas come your way.
Yeah.
The end goal, like, we need to get this game done, and the game has to be awesome, and I don't care who has the best idea or where it comes from, and I'm fine with sharing credit. That's another lesson I learned, is like, you should just share credit all the time, because people know, and they're going to respect that you're sharing the credit, and you just it's just a good thing to do.
And then the other one was Remy again, who talked, and we kind of asked him, like, why, how do you think this came together, right? This game, and how did this thing get made? And he basically talked about, like, how insane it was, the team they had. And then he cited several people specifically, like, this person is now, head of this, or has his own company. This person is now the head of all this, of animation at this other place or whatever. I don't remember those names off the top of my head. One was Patrice Desolé, but he just, like, we just had the superstars, and then we just got, that's just lightning in a bottle, and we just got lucky that way. So that was one I also thought was a good, it comes up a lot in Brian's as well, because he's constantly talking about the team and, like, the writer's room kind of feeling of the designers and things like that. So it comes up a lot there too. But those two specific quotes I thought really, were a good point.
Yeah.
Collaborating with that team. I mean, if you look at the amount of talent working on that project and where they are now, it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Of course, Patrice, which owns his own company at Panache, with Alex, the animation director, is a genius of animation, and Philip has his own company called Red Barrels with David Chateauneuf, the lead LD in that project. Raphael Lacoste, another Lacoste, was the art director, but he doesn't need presentation now. He's like the Assassin's Creed franchise art director, and he's like huge in the industry. And a lot of other talent all across that team. So it was really a very special moment to have the chance to collaborate with those guys and to make history with that game.
Good ones for sure. I remember James bringing. Yeah, James. It was nice that James had brought that up, because I feel like he hit it a couple times, or it was definitely an important point to him. So it was nice to hear.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I think about his background, and, like, a lot of what he did was to bring together all of the players he had ever played with into his game. into Baldur's Gate. It's like not only did the team make the game, but all these other people helped make that game. The character sheets. He also mentioned Minsk at one point was another. I think might have been another developer on the game. I can't remember now.
I think so.
Or might have been Bacchus. I can't remember now. And later he talked about he had a book that was, I don't know if it's come out yet, but that he was going to have Bacchus's character in.
Oh, that's right.
With a full page, and stuff. So I mean, it's just, you can feel like the connection to people in all of these conversations, and that I think is really, really important too. So the teams. I mean, the teams are a lot of the reason why we do it. I think back on teams I've worked with. I mean, there was a time in my career where I didn't leave when I was feeling pretty run down and like, this is not going to work out. Narrator. It didn't. And I didn't leave because I didn't want to leave the team. And I am still very friendly with one of those people, and I'm working with him every day. So, so it's really important. It's such a collaborative. We all have skills, that other departments need to get the work done, and that just means we have to work really closely together and bring those ideas from everywhere to make the best thing we can. And so it's hugely important. So,
amen.
So there you go. That is our year in review for 2021, a year which I think I can otherwise mostly forget. That is not entirely true, but the state of the nation is still dire. But
we did start a company, though.
I was going to say, professionally, it was a great year for me. And of course, always on the podcast, it's a good year for me. So it has definitely been. There's much to like about 2021, especially with regards to games and game development for me. And it was great to play some of these games again. Some of these games playing for like a third time. I mean, we didn't talk about all the games we played, but it's a great list and another fine year.
One thing I reflected on about the games this year, and I don't know, it's probably the case every year for me, really. But this year in particular, there were a handful of games that I had started back when they had come out, but never finished, like Resident Evil 4. We technically finished Ocarina of Time at the end of, beginning of this year, Prince of Persia. I hadn't played Ratchet before. But it was just, that's one of those things with a podcast that it was nice to actually, it's a forcing function, but to see the full arc of a game, and to really see what people like. RE4 is a good example for me, especially because to see what people really loved about it, and I didn't, who knows why you stopped playing a game, back so many years ago, but seeing the full arc of it, often for me at least makes me appreciate it even more. So it's always a thing I'm thankful for with the podcast, and reflect on, at the end of the year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, most of this I had played before. I think the only one I hadn't, ironically, was Final Fantasy VI. I think everything else I had played previously. But yeah, I mean, I genuinely love going back and playing games that I quite enjoyed. I am a finisher. Like, I very rarely don't finish a game. I don't tend to put games down. I tend to just play them for long periods of time. I won't say that there are definitely games that I've started and not been able to finish, but it's like, I still know about them. I'm still going to get back to them. Like, I have a list in my head. I can think of like 5 games off the top of my head. I'm like, yep, still installed. I'm still going to finish that one. Yeah. But bandwidth has been, this takes up most of my gaming time every week. So
I think that's where we differ too. Obviously, I'm notorious for not finishing everything, even on the podcast, but I don't even in real life too. Unless it really something like, well, I played Control on stream, but I would have finished Control anyway. Unless it's something that really grabs me, I tend to not. And I don't know if it's a time thing or an attention span or what it is, but obviously Prey is the recent example I use a lot when we talk about the topic, and I go real deep. Or Arkham Asylum is another one of my like 100%ers. But yeah, it's you are a finisher, and so you if you've played it, chances are.
Yeah, chances are you finished it. The one that got away was Arcanum, which I tried to play earlier this year.
You tried again,
and it just, technically speaking, it is just too broken in 2021, 2022 to play. It's just not playable, unfortunately.
That's too bad.
And I just wonder if it really ever was. Like, I remember that had a very rocky launch, and it was advertised like crazy. I was so interested in it, but it just didn't.
Maybe there's
unfortunately just didn't hold up.
Maybe you can watch somebody play it.
Watch somebody play it, but what if they make choices different from what I would? Just can't have it.
That's true.
Just can't have it. All right. Well, let's I guess put a pin then in 2021 and pop it like a balloon and move on instead to some email. These were sent, of course, to devgameclub@gmail.com. We didn't get any reviews this time. I always check right before, and I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't check, but I did check. We always love to have those as well, or just tell a friend. We don't do any advertising or anything like this. This is a labor of love for us, and we'd love to reach new listeners. Why don't you go ahead and start with the first email I gave you?
Yes, Microsoft Office Shooter. What? From Jarko Savula,
I believe. Yeah.
Yes, he's written or they've written it.
He has. Right? Yep.
Hello, good people. I remember playing Halo when it was released on PC. Oh yes, right. And being blown away by the scale of the battles and the enemy AI. One thing above all else, I remember the horror surprise of the flood. I also remember it testing my PC's capabilities. The space zombies might not be the most original concept, but it was something I didn't see coming. I have wondered why I never really returned to the franchise. I played Halo 5 multiplayer with friends, but was just really bad at it. But I think it has something to do with marketing. Now that I'm thinking about Halo, I remember all kinds of interesting things from it. But every time a new Halo is released, it looks like the most boring sci-fi shooter with the default space armor man. Is it the Microsoft corporate stamp, or is it just me? Thank you for the great podcast, Jarko Savula. Postscript, touching the touchstones. You just threw that in a few episodes ago, and you thought I wouldn't notice.
Yeah, he was the one who talked about us touching on things. He's Finnish, and I don't think it's a Finnish. Yeah, it's funny. I sort of think he wasn't the first Space Marine by any means. I think he is the most iconic Space Marine now, for sure. I think everybody knows Master Chief. The question is, will Master Chief take off his helmet, in the Halo show? If there is a Halo show. I know there's going to be a Halo show, but there is
a Halo show. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, no, I know, but there's been a Halo show, so I'm just saying, we'll see.
That's true. Yeah, until you actually see it. Yeah.
Until it's actually out, is it real? But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, he's he's correct. I think
it's funny. Actually, I want to touch on something that you mentioned. I think I can't remember if it was last episode or the episode before. You described him. As a white guy, and for some reason, I always thought the Chief was black.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's part of his allure. All these years has been his fact that his helmet. Yeah. For sure. And that it is up to the, I come from two angles, knowing obviously who John is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm sure there's
and also that the voice is a white guy.
Oh, okay.
Knowing
I didn't know
voice is
that.
away.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know the voice actor by any means, but yeah. No, I don't know why I thought that. I think it was the end of Halo 3, and maybe I also like I forget who the sergeant is, but the
Johnson.
sergeant. Yeah, that kind of I think also influenced me. Like the baddest badasses are the black guys. I think it was also the thing. I was like, it's like there's a connection. Like they I think in 3 that's reinforced a little bit more. I don't even remember. I know I played that on the Xbox Elite when I got my 360 Elite back in the day. It came with that. I gave it a go. And I think that was when I kind of made that, like, I didn't have a feeling of that in the first one, especially because played it co-op, but yeah, anyway, so in some ways, even though he is generic, there's been something in me that resists him being generic, because I thought of him under the hood as not being generic. you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's weird.
Yeah, so. I mean, yeah, it's and that was Jarko's read on the him from his perspective. So that it it's tricky. See, I feel like one of the challenges that I think that the franchise has had is, though they have a great icon, Master Chief is weirdly anonymous / generic on purpose, and so one of the challenges the franchise has, in my opinion, and it is something that 343 had intended to really focus on from the beginning, and that's where characters like Halsey come in, or Lasky, or any of the new characters, is trying to build out a universe, right, where it's not just about Master Chief. But there, you can go too far with that too, right? Because you lose the thread, and that's where Infinite kind of tries to bring Chief back into it. But at the end of the day, I mean, it is a space opera fantasy, right? And you kind of either want that or you don't. And I think marketing often focuses on the stuff that's going to reach the widest, number of people. And I think it sounds like Jarko's a little more looking for some, more interesting things. If he's finished, maybe Control. I think he wrote in about Control, is my memory.
Yes, actually. He mentioned it as the finest cultural output of Finland, along those lines, for games anyway.
Which is great.
And actually, I want to point out and thank him in this email. We didn't read it on the air. He also sent me a couple book recommendations, because at the time he hadn't mentioned any authors, but he corrected that this time. So I've got something to go on.
Good. Yeah. Well, and I think, if I can imagine him seeing a trailer for Control and being super excited, right? And the contrast of those two things are right. So wide. So,
Yep. Yeah. I like the specific too. Like, I tend to like specific stories. I do like games with stories, and I do contrast that with lore.
Oh yeah,
anyway.
For sure. Yeah. And that's why it's hard to make a trailer for Halo, is because it isn't really more about the universe and the lore and the fiction than it is about the story. And I think that's where I'm really interested to see where the TV show goes, because obviously they have to make it about a story. And
and it'd be interesting because there's been some other, heroes underneath the helmet in the Star Wars universe anyway, that have been on TV, in this last year or two, both with, I guess, Boba Fett's now on, and then prior to that, The Mandalorian, which has had, I guess, a couple seasons now. So I have one here from Ashton Herman. Its subject is Halo Combat Evolved Memories. This is kind of a long one, and I will content warn, there is a brief mention of suicide towards the end. Hey, Brett and Tim. I'm so excited you guys are diving into Halo. Sorry, this is a few weeks old. And I couldn't not write in about what's one of the most important games of my life. It was December 2001. My parents were looking for ideas and wanted to go big that year for Christmas. I can't remember why. So I told them I wanted the new Xbox and a copy of Halo, which was, as far as I could tell, the killer app on the console. I would say that's probably true. Christmas morning came, and I was excited to receive my Xbox, but I knew next to nothing about Bungie's shooter. Can't possibly be as good as Half-Life, I remember thinking at one point. In fact, the first thing I did with my shiny Matte Black, new console was pop in the soundtrack to the Fellowship of the Ring that my sister had gifted me that same day and rip it to the hard disk. Eventually, though, I fired up Halo, and then I was hooked. After Christmas break, I invited some of my relatively casual friends at school to come to my house and check it out. What I didn't know at the time was that the invitation would lead to the first of what became nearly daily gaming sessions at my house after school for the following years. Those casual friends became family to me, and they remain my closest friends to this day, nearly 20 years later. It's impossible for me now to divorce my nostalgia from Halo from the developments of those relationships, and the series is very dear to me as a result. It has been a constant companion to me throughout my life as I've played through every single mainline game, always solo on Legendary at least once, currently working on Infinite. I have strong associations between nearly every mainline game and milestones in my life. Halo 2 was my first year of college. I played through Reach in my wife's and my very first apartment. I finished Halo 4 with my newborn daughter, just barely more than 5 weeks old, in my arms. I can still remember seeing my own reflection in the TV screen, backlit by our Christmas tree, a new father holding the most precious person in the world in my hands, and wondering if one day she'd grow up to enjoy playing games with her dad. And Halo 5 was a refuge to me during lockdown in 2020. I finished it less than 2 weeks before we lost one of those dear friends to suicide. Halo Combat Evolved represents to me so much about what makes video games magical. It's an engrossing science fiction world that pulls you in almost immediately and doesn't let you go. You could play nothing but the campaign and still walk away feeling like it's one of the best games in this genre, but it's also a social game that was, for me at least, unparalleled at the time of its release, the kind of game that set the stage for schoolmates to become friends and for friends to become brothers. Thanks for all you guys do. You're both awesome. Ashton Herman. So thank you, Ashton, and sorry for your loss. Yeah, I mean, the multiplayer is something that we didn't get around to playing, and somebody asked about a Discord last week, and that looks like that's sort of getting off the ground a little bit. But I did love the idea of this just hitting at a time in your life, right? You know, that it becomes something that you make friendships through. You know, and that's yeah.
Yeah, that was an affecting email, I got to say. Thank you for sending it in. I got a little choked up because, yeah, I mean, things like this have an memorable impact. Anything you love, right? On anything that has multiple iterations and continues to be something you return to and still love. I think we all have something like that, and Halo, weirdly, for me, I had been a developer during all of the releases, right? So my memories come associated with what game I was working on at the time. I remember when 3 came out when I was at Crystal Dynamics, and we played co-op and things like that. I don't remember if we mentioned this on the series, but at LucasArts, when 1 came out, we did a multiplayer tournament.
Yeah, that's right.
That I didn't mention.
Yeah, we didn't. I don't think that came up, but yeah.
Yeah, we actually, we linked whatever 16 or 8.
I think it was
8.
8. Yeah,
I think it's 8 for 1. Yeah, 8 boxes together, and we did a tournament. I think our team came in second, maybe. And then I forgot to mention this, but we actually did one. I don't mind saying this, even though I don't know if I can, but we did an internal Halo 1 tournament at 343 while I was there, during the development of Infinite. Just because we wanted to kind of relive that stuff, and I was on a team. We were playing with some of the pro players and stuff, so I didn't have a chance, but I did okay. But it was fun because we got to kind of see how, the original multiplayer, we reminded us how it played, right? And some of those pro players who are pro players now in the wild still play Halo 1 because it's nostalgic, right? And it all of them have stories like Ashton's where they talk about the friends they made, the communities that they're a part of still today. It's something magical about it, especially the multiplayer side of it. But to his point, even the campaigns had those memorable moments. So I don't know, Ashton, if you're up for it, but I sure would love to share that email with some folks at 343. I know, because I think they would really appreciate it. So let us know if you're up for me sharing that, because I think it would they would.
I mean,
they
I
would
think
appreciate
publicly
hearing
it's in the public domain to some degree, but I will reach out to him via email to say, hey, Tim would like to forward this on. So, so that I'm sure he'll listen to this soon. So I know Ashton's keeps up with the cast pretty closely. So thanks, Ashton. I think you have one from KB next. I'd like to read that one.
Yeah.
In connection with this one, that
Yeah.
was serendipitous. I thought they were together, so that's good. And maybe we'll end with that one because it has a nice touch point with this one.
Okay. So this is a snippet from a longer mail. So the subject.
Yeah, he sent a very long mail and said, "Hey, you don't have to read any of this." But after I read it, I was like, "Oh, but I have to include. We have to read this
one
part
section.
of it." I mean, it kind of there was a whole thread about this, but it particularly ties nicely with Ashton's as well.
So this is the snippet. The subject of the overall email, I guess, is all things Halo, the solace for my soul. From KB. Dear TLJ and BD. Haven't seen that one before.
It's from KB, so.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Okay, there's good theme there. It's just the TLJ too is also like not my initials,
right?
But they are in this case, so I guess it's appropriate. So he says, also my daughter's favorite game series of all time is how it starts. So obviously this is a snippet. She's almost 21 now. Oh, wow. And has been playing Halo stuff for 10 years or so. She is much, much, much better at Halo than I. Of course, I'm pushing 56 and she is a whippersnapper. Long ago, I downloaded the Mjolnir mix of the Halo theme from Halo 2 and started playing it in the kitchen. My daughter, who was maybe 14 at the time, walked into the kitchen and stopped in her tracks. She listened for a solid few seconds and then yelled, "Yes, yes," and started dancing around the house. We played that one track so many times that day. It is still my wake-up alarm music. Achievement for killing a hunter with a single pistol shot. Hunters hunted. Have never done this. Of course, my daughter has. Does she bring this up every time we play CE? Why, yes, she does. That's amazing. Come on, KB, you can get that achievement. It's possible. That's another great. Yeah, it's a good partner story to the previous one, and I just love that it's still, she's still playing and she loves it, and I just always love when parents and kids have found something like that are mutually, exciting to them, and nostalgia and connection. A small example, but Leah and I still talk about moments when we played Minecraft together, and we have inside jokes where, with the game and the sound the villagers make in Minecraft. We kind of, we jokingly make that sound every now and then, and so it's awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I thought it was great, because Ashton was talking about, maybe she'll play someday, and then I think KB gives him hope. So, because starting playing Halo with your dad when you're 11, it's that's a special relationship right there. So good for you, KB, and I'm glad you have that. I'm glad you have that with your daughter. That's awesome. I'm gonna finish out and do one last email because it's very, very short, and we're not going to discuss it. We're just going to leave it where it is because obviously we disagree. The subject is Halo graphics. It's from Truffles Mochaccino / Sasha. Dear Tim and Brett, the 2011 graphics are hideous. Yours sincerely, Sasha.
Yes. Yes.
Just dropping a plasma grenade right in there, Sasha. I appreciate you. Yeah, it's good. That's good.
He just stuck a plasma grenade to you. That's what.
Yes, she threw one right into the mix. That's another young whippersnapper right there, so she can be forgiven her sins. No, she'll grow up someday. All right, that is going to be our show. I think we have a next game picked out. We're not sure that we're going to start it for next week because we may get an interview. one of us knows some people who worked on this game, I gather, so we might be able to get some folks. It's mostly a scheduling thing, so close to the holidays, and everybody's kind of getting the swing of thing with work. So we're trying to thread that needle and see if we can do it. So we may have that next week. If not, I will announce our next game on Twitter this week. That's at Dev Game Club. We can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
We, of course, love all the all the emails and reviews are great. And I didn't mention yet, but we are also on the web at devgameclub.com. You can also find Tim streaming over at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end, where you are playing Resident Evil 7, which remains terrifying, I gather.
Yeah, it's real hard to play. And I'm in the... I won't give it away where I'm at exactly, but I'm in a section that's even worse stuff going on. But I think I'm getting there. I'm going to take the night off this week, though. So if you're listening to this, you already know that. But just mainly to rest my nerves some. But it's still very good. Still very good, and I'm still very impressed with it. And I apologize to Sasha too. I think I said he, and I think I've made that mistake before. So.
Yep, that's fine. It happens. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, of course, is by Marcus Sia, who has also been working on a merch store for us. You can find that in the Twitter, in I guess the retweets. I should probably make that part of our bio link or something. I'll do that. Have fun ringing in a new podcast year this week, and good night.
Good night.
I'm guessing Tim's wife just came out to the Love Hut for something. I don't know.
It was more like she brought the dogs out, forgetting that we were recording and wanted to visit, and so all the dogs streamed into the
Perfect.
hut, and I was like, oh no.